the 10th of May, the Supreme Court of Uzbekistan handed down a verdict on the Sardoba Dam collapse. It took 6 months to hear the case, in which as many as 17 people were charged. Of the 17 defendants, 6 were sentenced to prison terms, while the rest were either released on bail and ordered not to leave, or were stripped of the right to conduct business.
Судебный процесс проходил в закрытом режиме.
The trial was closed to the public. The Uzbek authorities justified this by alleging that the case was directly related to state secrets. Since the entire process, including the expert conclusion, was classified, our team decided to conduct its own investigation to understand what happened and why. We were assisted by Dr. Yevgeny Simonov, an environmental expert and coordinator of the International Environmental Coalition Rivers Without Borders, Igor Shkradyuk, expert of the International Socio-Ecological Union, Sergei Mayorov, lawyer of one of the accused in the case of the dam collapse, Aziz Noor, journalist of Ozotlik, the Uzbek service of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and Uzbek officials, as well as documentation relating to the general contractor of the Sardoba Dam, Uzbek Railways monopolist Uzbekistan Temir Yolara, and their subcontractors.
Dördüncü sahhoz damba buzulup ketdi. Damba ötüp bolmayapti mana birinchi sahhoz tarafga.
Last year, at the time of the flood, we were at home. It was Ramadan. We got up in the morning to start the fast. We went outside. There were lots of people around. Everyone was heading somewhere. I wondered where they were going. We asked, and people told us that the dam had broken. Then we also packed up our things and documents and hit the road. I get anxious when I talk about it. I don't even want to remember it. On May 1st, 2020, the Sardoba Dam collapsed, causing the deaths of 6 people. 1 person went missing.
In
the morning, the news came that the water was coming, and 5 or 6 hours later it reached us, and we left the area. Then the National Guard came, and they said that the water would reach up to the level of the ceiling. At first, we didn't believe this would happen. There was a canal, and I thought the water would never overflow it, and we were waiting there by the canal. But when we saw the water was rising above, we realized that they were right. The water stayed up to the ceiling level for 20 days.
As a result of the flooding, over 60,000 people were evacuated. Settlements and crops in 3 districts in Sardaria region, as well as a number of villages in neighbouring Kazakhstan, were seriously damaged. International experts have rated the disaster in Uzbekistan as one of the largest dam accidents in the past decade. The general public only learned of the dam's existence when President Mirziyoyev visited Sardoba on May 17, 2017. Pictures of him in a boat sailing on the reservoir circulated around the country. Prior to that, few people knew that it was even there. Opening the reservoir, which was almost finished, the president said it would help grow 2 harvests of cotton and grain a year. He also talked about plans for walnut plantations and fisheries. President Mirziyoyev opened Sardoba almost immediately after returning from China, where he secured a $2.7 billion investment to repair and build 32 reservoirs in Uzbekistan.
He explained that Chinese money would go into these kind of projects. We have to work quickly while we are considered capable partners. He needed to show that something was being done, and he chose to show it.
Строительство Сардобинского
The construction of the Sardoba Dam began in 2009 on the orders of former Uzbek President Islam Karimov. The project did not receive much publicity, and there were good reasons for that.
Между странами бассейна Аральского моря существует
There are many agreements between the countries of the Aral Sea Basin that limit water use, for the simple reason that the water use there has been so wasteful that the whole sea has been drained. I'm now dreading to think what will happen if water usage increases again.
расхитительно устроено, что море
That's why there's an agreement that no new large reservoirs will be built on this territory without special agreements. And this is why Sardoba was built in secret. Since the Karimov government openly opposed the construction of such reservoirs by its neighboring countries, it cannot openly build a similar project on its own territory.
на территории соседей, правительство Каримова не могло себе позволить в открытую строить таковые у себя.
В 2009 году нынешний президент Узбекистана
In 2009, President Mirziyoyev was the Prime Minister, and it was he who was responsible for overseeing the construction of the reservoir. It was not mentioned in any official government papers.
Поэтому за весь этот период в тех документах, которые я могу достать,
The Uzbek government publishes a great deal of information in open sources, but reviewing all these documents for the entire period, I found mention of the construction at Sardoba only once. But obviously, the project was funded, construction proceeded for several years, and it was built in the end, but there is almost no official information about it.
никаких упоминаний, которые можно найти в сети интернет, мною не обнаружено.
The construction of the Sardoba Dam took about 8 years, but it is impossible to find any open-source documented evidence on this. There is no official information about how much the construction cost. The only source that reported construction costs after the accident was the online publication Gazeta Uz. It quoted an insider source which put the figure at $404 million. Just to remind you, this money came out of the state budget, that is, from the taxpayer's pocket.
Плотина такого размера, как на Сардобе,
A dam as large as the one at Sardoba can usually be built in a period much shorter than 8 years. 2 years would be normal, the first year for surveys of the site and preparatory work, and the second for bringing rocks and cement and the construction. But at Sardoba, dam construction stretched out for 8 years. But in the final year, they were trying to build very fast. However, it turns out that building fast, cheap, and cheerful does not work very well. There were not enough people who understood this clearly enough to sound the alarm about the potential dangers ahead.
Two days after the dam burst, the Office of the Uzbek Prosecutor General launched a criminal case. President Mirziyoyev assured the public that wrongdoers would be punished.
Xalqimiz bir narsadan ko'ngli to'q bo'lishi.
Our people should be sure of one thing. There should be no room for any rumors and gossip. On my instruction, law enforcement authorities have launched an objective, impartial, and comprehensive investigation into the flooding incident.
Albatta javob beradi.
Во-первых, обещали всемирное разбирательство.
First, they promised a full investigation into who allowed this to happen. Since December, the obvious scapegoats have been in the dock. A few third-tier people who didn't make any key decisions.
Какие-то люди третьего эшелона, которые, собственно, ключевых решений не принимали.
Итак, с большой трибуны
Although the president promised a proper investigation and a trial, we won't know how serious it was because the entire process was held behind closed doors.
адвокат Сергей Майоров, представляющий
Lawyer Sergei Mayorov, who represented one of the defendants, praised the court for its compliance with Uzbekistan's Code of Criminal Procedures, but still the court rejected his motions to remove the secrecy requirement.
В суде я заявил требование о снятии.
In court, I demanded that the requirement for secrecy be lifted from the criminal case. The investigation had concluded, and any negative consequences that could have come from declassification of the investigation materials had ended. I argued the trial should take place in the open, in keeping with the UN International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which Uzbekistan has joined. Then, after the court rejected this argument, I pointed out that legally the trial needed to be formally designated as secret by an act of the court. But the court did not take responsibility in this way. Instead, it just stated that the case had been classified as secret at the preliminary investigation stage, end of story. Its completely illegal.
Еще на стадии предварительного следствия. Это абсолютно незаконно.
Но один из источников радио Озодлик образно.
One source on Ozodlik radio described the trial as a process of sacrificing small fish in the name of saving large sharks. He made this point when explaining why the process was taking place behind closed doors. Without extra ears and eyes, it would be easier to protect the big sharks.
In July last year, 2 months after the collapse, the prosecutor's office named the causes of the accident: errors in the design documentation, construction and operation.
Кроме расследования вины конкретных должностных лиц,
It is obvious that, in addition to investigating the guilt of specific officials, there should be some understanding of how this sort of work should have been done, with what sort of quality control, and why no one had sounded the alarm or had any way of sounding the alarm when they saw that the lower part of the dam was wet, that is, that the water was seeping through. After the flood, there were reports that people had indeed seen that the lower part of the dam was seeping water, but no one called the Ministry of Emergency Situations or the National Security Committee in time.
мне позвонил вовремя. Об этом стали думать постфактум.
После прорыва плотины международные эксперты в области строительства
After the dam collapsed, international hydroelectric construction experts and ecologists published several analytical articles on the possible causes of the catastrophe. We spoke with 2 organisations on condition of anonymity. They said that they had not been approached by the Uzbek authorities to assist in the investigation. Lawyers for those already convicted in the Sardoba case also appealed to the court to bring in international experts, but to no avail.
Мнение международных экспертов не учитывалось, не рассматривалось.
The opinions of international experts were not taken into account. They were just ignored. I and the other lawyers for the defense were demanding to hear their testimony and arguing that their opinions should be presented in open court as evidence. But this was rejected.
Их мнение в суде как доказательство. Это было отклонено.
Why was it necessary to have an independent examination of international experts, not only to independently confirm or disprove errors in the design and construction of the reservoir, but also to assess the environmental situation and changes that occurred between when construction began in 2009 and its completion in 2017?
Лет 10 назад Мировой банк начал собирать информацию.
About 10 years ago, the World Bank began collecting information about the effects of climate change in Central Asia. They predict that temperatures will continue to rise, resulting in increased evaporation of water. So while precipitation will also increase, the evaporation will increase more, and the flow of water into the rivers will decrease. The other problem is that weather and climate patterns will become more irregular, causing more heavy rains and more severe droughts. As a result, the existing reservoirs will not be able to provide irrigation for farming in a drought and will not be sufficient to handle heavy rainstorms. Therefore, it is necessary to review the entire farming system and all the issues related to water engineering.
Проектировать всю систему земледелия и всю гидротехнику.
Я допускаю, что речь идет.
I presume that we are talking about bigger factors, about natural forces of some kind. And in this case, there may be no culprits in the accident, but a proper study has not been done.
These satellite images clearly show the area where the reservoir is located and the land which is mostly used for irrigation farming. This is the footage before the flood, and this is the footage after.
Действительно, там же плоско, как стол, вы же видели.
It's as flat as a table, and they were building a ziggurat. I'm sorry. Water-retaining structures like Sardoba, built in a flat area, were built once in Central Asia, but I had never seen it in modern practice. Then I realized there are 5 of them in Uzbekistan. Just like Sardoba, when you put walls on the sides, it is kind of like a sand castle that kids build. It's legitimate technique, but it's used when there are no other options. You only build this sort of thing when you're desperate.
Очень нехорошая жизнь.
In 2010, the contractor for the construction of the Sardoba Dam was the state company Uzbekistan, whose chairman until 2017 was Abdulghani Sanginov. After he presented the project to the president, Uzbekistan was reorganized and renamed Uzbek Hydroenergo. But the chairman didn't change. Senator Abdulghani Sanginov remained the head of the new company. there is a state-appointed general contractor of the project, the company Uz-Montaj, which is a part of Uzbekistan Railways. In 2010, it was chaired by Okhil Ramatov. He is now the first Deputy Prime Minister of Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan Railways is not a certified company for the construction of hydrotechnical facilities. Next, we have subcontractors, of which there are more than 10. One of the main subcontractors was the private company Topalang HPD Holding. Journalists from Ozodlik conducted an investigation and found out that there is no information about the tender for the construction of the dam in the public domain.
Ozodlik learned that a company called Topalang Water Construction, which is one of 7 companies in Sanginov's holding, took part in the construction of the dam. And it owns another company, Topalang HPD Holding, the main shareholder and director of which is Sanginov's 26-year-old son. In the course of the investigation conducted by Ozodlik Radio, we were able to find out that Mirziyoyev's close friend, Senator Sanginov, acting on behalf of the state as head of Uzsuvenergo, handed over a lucrative contract to his own company.
So the father runs the state's main hydropower company and the son is a subcontractor working with state funds. No one was perplexed by such a conflict of interest, and even the Prosecutor General's office, which investigated the dam collapse, did not seem to pay any attention to it.
It turns out that Senator Sanginov was overseeing the construction of the Sardoba Reservoir on behalf of the state. The general contractor is a company owned by Uzbekistan Railways. It is not clear on what basis it was selected. As general contractor, it was then hiring subcontractors, private companies, for the construction of the reservoir. Many of these subcontractors belong to the family of Mr. Sanginov.
In May 2020, Abdulghani Sanginov was appointed as a member of the commission investigating the causes of the disaster, and in February 2021 also received an award for his contribution to the development of hydropower in Central Asia.
Neither
Abdulghani Sanginov, nor his son, nor any of the top officials who took decisions on the construction of the Sardoba Dam and how it was funded faced charges. 6 people were sentenced to prison, of whom only one was an employee of Topalang HPD Holding. 3 other employees of the company were fined. The other 5 defendants who received prison sentences were employees of other subcontractors.
I stated in court in my arguments for the defense that the court was violating the Constitution. According to the Constitution, the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of government are independent of each other. But in fact, I believe that the court is under the strict influence and control of the executive branch. I will remind you that a few days before the verdict, even before the deliberations began, the media published a report based on government information in which it explicitly accused those who designed the dam, like my client, of causing the collapse of the dam. This is certainly not legal. Putting pressure on the court in this way is a violation of the Constitution, which states that the branches of government should be equal. Since there were no real proceedings to get to the root of the matter, at least in the public space, and since many people who would most likely have been implicated remain in their positions, I am afraid that this outcome will encourage further impunity. Since the purpose of the court is to establish the truth, I believe that the court failed in its task. It did not establish the truth, by which I mean the real reasons for the collapse of the dam. It is my opinion that the court has not established these facts, and the true culprits responsible for this accident were not the ones sitting in the dock.
In practically all countries where there are hydraulic structures, there is a commission which deals with their safety. In Uzbekistan, this function is entrusted to the State Inspectorate for the control and supervision of the technical condition and safety of large and especially important water facilities. It also supervised the operation of the Sardoba Dam. However, we do not know how the Inspectorate was controlled, because it is a secret. But immediately after the catastrophe, a new procedure was developed on how to conduct a full inspection of all hydraulic structures of the country.
гидротехнических сооружений страны.
Ряд положений в том, что они вынесли на обсуждение в качестве проекта инструкции, был так чуден.
So the Inspectorate wrote up new draft instructions for the survey to be conducted, and these instructions were submitted for discussion. When I read it, I asked my Uzbek colleagues to check if the people who drafted them really meant what they had written. Let me explain. For general purposes, everyone uses topographic data from an American-led survey done in the 2000s called SRTM. This data is good for many purposes, but its problem is that the margin of error is substantially more than 1 meter, which in flat areas is very substantial. But the draft instructions submitted for discussion by the Inspectorate said that this SRTM data should be used to determine the levels of hydraulic structures across Uzbekistan. But for this purpose, even an error of 25 centimeters can mean life or death. The SRTM data is free. Higher quality data can be purchased. You can buy satellite data accurate down to 10 centimeters, but this isn't cheap. You have to pay for it.
According to unofficial data, the construction of the reservoir cost 1.3 trillion soms, or $404 million. In August 2020, the Ministry of Finance stated that 1.5 trillion soms in state aid would be allocated for the Sardoba disaster. What if such a catastrophe happens again?
Пока тают ледники, сток рек.
As long as the ice is melting, the flow of water through the rivers will be preserved. For the next 10 years, there will be water in the rivers. But what about when the ice has melted completely? The 9 or 10 rivers running through Uzbekistan, for instance the Sirdarya and Amudarya, have their sources outside of Uzbekistan. There's a great need for interstate measures to preserve water sources. Meanwhile, the danger of mudslides is growing. There are about 5 or 6 dangerous areas for this on the territory of Uzbekistan. The increase in heavy rainfalls also increases the danger of mudslides. These mudslides carry 2 dangers. First, they can create a sort of natural dam that diverts water. Second, they can destroy a dam that was already there. All this means it is necessary to examine all the existing facilities and then start to construct new bypass channels, to strengthen slopes and so on, and as also to put into place new monitoring systems for moisture accumulation in the soil to protect against mudslide risks.
Предупреждение о накоплении влаги в грунте о силе опасности.
The Sardoba Dam collapse provided an opportunity to draw attention to the problems in the construction of such structures in Uzbekistan and to the possible changes in the climate for which one should be prepared. But there is another major issue: the inertia and unwillingness of the Uzbek authorities to reform the system of agriculture and limit their dependence on cotton.
Я бы дал 25% негативных изменений.
So far, I would attribute about 25% of the problem to climate change and the other 75% to various political, technological, and other miscalculations. After the Aral Sea was drained, it was clearly stated in the 1980s that we should do whatever it takes to restore it, including to drastically reduce cotton production. Is this what has been done? Where cotton production was reduced, they began instead to produce 2 wheat crops per year. From the point of view of sustainability, this is an absolutely pointless dead-end path. And these 2 wheat crops consumed more water than the cotton that was there before. This is what I was told by irrigation specialists. Not many regions of the world are given this chance to understand what is going on and imagine a new future. But if those aren't the priorities, and if nothing is done, the next time will be worse.
Поэтому следующий кризис может быть гораздо страшнее.
Sardoba стала своего рода очередным тревожным звонком.
Sardoba was another wake-up call to which we must react. The trial took place behind closed doors, which raises concerns about its impartiality. Those responsible for the construction and allocation of public funds were not brought to justice. The views of international experts were not taken into account. The issue of water distribution in Central Asia should be a priority for the leaders of the entire region. It requires a joint approach and not one which reflects only national, individual needs.